Moving on to Israel's strike on Iran. According to the BBC, satellite images show damage on a number of military sites in Iran caused by Israel's strikes early Saturday morning. Experts say missile production and air defense sites were damaged, as well as one linked to Iran's nuclear program. Meanwhile, Iran says it's going to raise its military budget by 200%, essentially tripling its defense spending. Now, for more, we're joined by Enia Krivine, Senior Director of the Israel Program and National Security Network at the FDD. Thank you so much for joining us. Apologies. First of all...
Thank you so much for having me.
First of all, how much has Iran admitted to with regards to damage done by Israel in Iran during the attack?
So Iran is trying very hard to downplay these attacks. And I must say, you see some of that downplaying also in Israel and from the U.S. I think all sides right now are interested in having a period of calm, at least up until the U.S. elections. At least that is at the forefront of President Biden's mind right now, and certainly Vice President Harris. The last thing they want is to be seen as having a big confrontation beforehand.
So what kind of response can we expect from Iran? The IRGC is threatening a, quote, bitter and unimaginable consequences for Israel's strike.
Yeah, so I think when looking at how Iran is going to respond, it's good to just take a step back and review what the past couple of months have held for Iran. And it might tell us a little bit about what we can expect going forward. So as we all have been seeing, Israel really flipped the script on the Iranian sort of axis of aggressors in the late summer. And as you saw with the Enia assassination in Tehran, and then the beeper and communications device operation in Beirut that was followed swiftly by the assassination of Nasrallah in a bunker that essentially decapitated Hezbollah leadership. All of this happened very quickly, demonstrating that Israel had completely penetrated the security apparatus in Tehran and in Beirut. And that was followed swiftly by an operation that Israel carried out against the Houthis in the Hodeidah port in Yemen. And just to make a point, the IDF invited a CNN reporter along with that to that operation in Yemen to demonstrate that Israel had the capability to operate over 1,000 miles from its home turf and the ability to refuel in the air. And that message, and they made this very clear, they told the reporter, we are demonstrating to you that we have the capability to do this as a message to Tehran that they are not safe in Iran, that Israel can essentially reach everywhere. So we've penetrated the intelligence apparatus, and we can also have the long arm to be able to reach you. And these are both messages that Israel sent loud and clear to Tehran. Unfortunately, they didn't get the memo. And just days later, you saw the ballistic missile attack on Tel Aviv, which, had very little impact at the end of the day on Israel. It was a big attack. It looked very pretty at night with the lights sort of going off and everything, but had very little bottom line. So I think what this shows us is that Israel's made it clear to Tehran that it has the capacity to penetrate, it can get in, it has essentially stripped Iran of its air defenses, so it could go in for future attacks very easily. And I think at this point, given how everyone is downplaying it, I think Iran is going to be keen to let this round lay as it is and not retaliate.
Many analysts are saying that Israel mitigated its response to the point that you were just making on Iran. But is this really because of the U.S. days before the election? That's what a lot of analysts are saying.
So there's no doubt that the U.S. exerted huge pressure on Israel to limit its operations. Of course, if you look at what Israel's options were, there are largely sort of four categories that Israel could have gone after. It could have gone after the regime itself, as in decapitating the regime. This is something that Israel's never done before as a sovereign state, but it was definitely something that was discussed by analysts. There is the oil infrastructure, there's the nuclear sites, and there's the military. And the U.S. was putting a lot of pressure on Israel not to go after the first three categories, not the leadership, not the oil, and not the nuclear. So the oil, for obvious reasons, because it didn't want oil prices to go up. And indeed, after the attack, the oil prices actually went down in the US. The cost went down on markets because Israel refrained from attacking the oil infrastructure. So that would have been considered as a big favor potentially to the United States. The nuclear, the US was worried, but many people in the non-proliferation community were worried that an attack on Iran's nuclear program could have led to an Iranian sprint to break out. And so Israel just went after the military assets. But in doing so, it kind of opened a door, and I'll tell you why. So Israel went after Iran's ballistic missiles production capability. That is to say that Iran can no longer produce those ballistic missiles and won't be able to for some time, which helps not only Israel, but also US interests as Iran had been exporting those ballistic missiles to Russia to use against Ukraine. So this is a boon not only for Israel, but for Western allies. And the other thing that Israel managed to accomplish in this attack was to completely take out Iran's strategic air defense. And this is a huge win because what it essentially says to Iran is, look, we can get in, we can refuel in the air, we can attack, we have the capability, the capacity, the will to go after all of these assets. But what we're going to do is we're going to remove your ability to defend yourself. We're going to make it so if we decide to come back, it's going to be very easy for us. And we're going to leave you kind of exposed and vulnerable. And given the earlier messaging that shows that Tehran's security apparatus is completely penetrated and that Israel has the capacity and the will to do this, I think that was a very strong and effective message for Israel to send.
Enia Krivine, thank you very much for that insight.